Hello. Good morning, everybody. We are speaking English. Stella is speaking, I think, Spanish, Swedish, English, but no German. And translation would just waste a bit too much time. So, good morning, everybody. It's really still morning. And on behalf of Taz Panther Foundation, I would like to welcome you to the Taz Lab 2023. We start with a very serious, not utterly delightful issue. We will talk about the ongoing persecution of the Australian journalist Julian Assange. Julian, as you probably know, is imprisoned since more than 4 years in a high-security prison in southeast London, His Majesty's Belmarsh prison, as it's called now. The US government wants Julian to be extradited to the United States because WikiLeaks published in 2010 a lot of secret American documents, military documents, and political and Secret Service documents. And across the Atlantic, no, I have to say, among these documents, there were quite a few documents which unveiled American war crimes in Iraq and in Afghanistan. Now, across the ocean, across the Atlantic, for Julian waits an indictment which contains 17 points, if I'm right. And if you just sum up the maximum sentence for these 17 points, you come up with 175 years, which means the Americans seem to be willing to bury Julian alive in a prison. And this is, I've been a journalist for 44 years now, and I must say, I can't think of such a scandalous violation, at least in America or in the so-called Free West. I can't think of such a blatant violation of the freedom of press. I still don't understand how politicians who accuse other countries like China or Russia, and they do rightly so, of violating the freedom of press, how they can justify the way Julian is treated, but that is what's still happening. And so, I personally think we just have to get him out of that bloody prison. 4 years is enough, and he was in the Ecuadorian embassy before, which was not really freedom. I am very happy to welcome and introduce to you Stella Assange. She came all the way from London to speak to us here at the Taz Lab. Stella, just very shortly, I read you were born in 1983 in South Africa. I think this is correct. You studied law and political sciences in Great Britain, and in the year 2011, you became a member of the legal team of the collective or group of lawyers who is defending Julian and who is trying to get them out of prison. And then, it was a professional and a social and a romantic relationship. Meanwhile, you have 2 kids with Julian, and you even could marry, although under very strange circumstances in the prison last year. So welcome, Stella. Nice to have you here. Just a few short remarks, then I pass it on to Stella. What you should know is that WikiLeaks was founded in 2006. It published in 2010 a collateral murder, a video, quite shocking videos and other documents. And after a series of publications in 2010, the administration of Barack Obama, US President Barack, started a criminal investigation against Julian, but not only against Julian, but also against other associates and members of WikiLeaks. Then Sweden wanted Julian to be extradited because some dubious claims for sexual abuse, and this whole thing has ended a long time ago, but Julian fled to escape a extradition to Sweden and then to the US. He fled in the Ecuadorian embassy, applied for political asylum, got political asylum. And yes, he lived there for 6.5 years, and then 11th of April, what was it? Which year was it?
2019.
19. He was arrested. The political asylum was withdrawn by the Ecuadorian government. He was arrested by Scotland Yard office and some CIA people among them, and brought to the Belmarsh high security prison where he is right now. Maybe, Stella, I just start with a very simple question. How is Julian doing after all this ordeal? 6.5 years in the embassy, now 4 years under special conditions in a high security prison. How's he coping?
Well, it's been such a long time that people forget, right? And people forget how long it's been. When Julian was arrested, it was a whole year before COVID even started. And every single day that he's been in there is a day that he's been fighting for his survival, fighting to regain his freedom, fighting to correct the historical narrative that has been so distorted, and it's been an extremely difficult time for him. He's in a small cell of 2 by 3 meters on his own. Most of the time, he's on his own. He has no access to the internet. It's a very grim environment. When he's outside of the cell, it's to collect his food or be taken to a meeting with his lawyers or taken to a meeting with me. But that as well is a very restrictive and oppressive process. He's accompanied down the corridor and then put in a holding cell and then he stays in a holding cell while they take him to a different part of the prison and so on. So this is a high security British prison. So the day-to-day existence is grim and difficult, and he's surrounded by people who are awaiting trial or waiting to be transferred to a different prison post-trial, and including some people who are accused or convicted of very serious crimes. On his wing, the prison wing, it's about 1/3 of the people are accused or convicted of manslaughter or murder, and it's obviously an alien environment to Julian, who is a public intellectual, a curious and intellectually curious person who thrives on understanding the world, and that prison is the precise opposite of what nurtures him.
And you, far as I understood, you are able to visit him and even to take your both your little sons. How is that happening? How can we imagine such a visit?
So we can visit about once or twice a week, and it's on set days, so it changes from week to week. And the visits are always with the rest of his wing. So it's the prisoners who are living in the same house block as Julian who have a visit at the same time. It's in a very big room, so it's about 3 times this room. with about 40 prisoners, each of them sitting at a table. The prisoners sit on one side of the table in a red chair, and the visitors sit on the other side of the table in a blue chair, in blue chairs, 3 of them. And in order to get into the prison, you have to first check in with the prison guards in a little building that's outside the prison walls. And then you have to take your fingerprints, and you're given a little tag, a number, and then you leave all your belongings behind. You can't take anything in, not even a blade of grass. And you're checked once more for your fingerprints. You're put in an airlock, so you're sectioned off in groups of up to 3 people, and then you go through an airport-style security check. You put your jackets and your belts and your shoes on a tray that goes through an X-ray machine. You walk through one of these metal detectors. Then after that, you're wanded down with a metal wand, front and back. They check under your feet. And then from there, you're taken to a second check, which is a pat-down search. The pat-down search is from the top. They check your arms, your legs, your front, and your back. They check your hair. They check inside your mouth. They check behind your ears and under your feet.
Excuse me, do they check the children as well like that?
Yeah, the only thing the children don't have to do is the fingerprints, but everything else is the same. Yeah. And then once you're through that section, you're then go through some more metal doors that open, so it's an airlock, so you have to go through one, and then you're in the space, and then that closes, and then the next one opens. You go through a little yard that takes you to the inner section, like the inner building of the prison. So this is like an outer building, and then there's a yard, and then there's the inner building that connects to the prison house blocks. And then they take your fingerprints again. It's again in one of these doors that close, and you have to wait while they take your fingerprints. They give you a second number. You go through another door, and then you're in kind of the waiting room outside the visitors' center. Then there's not every time, but often there's a drug dog check. So you have to stand on a little blue square, and the children have to stand on one side. And then you stand still, and then the dog comes and smells you and jumps up on you, and then goes from the back again and jumps up on you, and the children also have to do that. So there are some children, not ours, but there are some children who are very scared of dogs, and obviously these drug dogs are big dogs, and it's a bit intimidating. And then once the drug check, the drug dog check is done, then you can go into the actual visitor room, which, as I said, is about 3 times this size. They take your fingerprints one last time, and then they tell you which assigned table you should go to. The whole process takes, depending on how many people there are, but it can take up to half an hour. And then either Julian's already sitting at the table, or he hasn't been brought down yet. And then when he comes through a different door on the other side of the room.
Yeah. And are you surveyed? I mean, when you talk with him, is there some sort of surveillance, or?
Yes, I mean that's I think
they're guards probably.
Yeah, there are many. There are guards in this room. I think there are about maybe 15 guards at any one time, and they're just pacing around. There's an upstairs. It's like a mezzanine, so there's an upstairs through which they can see everyone, and there are cameras all like on the ceiling. Small ones and big ones as well that are rotational ones under a dome. behind a dome. I mean, and then the tables themselves are bugged, and the cameras. These are high.
Bugged means hidden microphones.
Yeah, with microphones, yeah. Because well, I mean, it's pretty obvious. This is a high security prison where they put people they want to surveil. So there's obviously no privacy there, and the cameras, they're probably fitted with lip reading software as well.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds horrible. I mean, on the other hand, I just read reports that two representatives of Reporter Without Borders, Reporter ohne Grenzen, wanted to see Julian, and they obviously failed. Could you just explain what happened there?
Well, I think this is an example of the complete farce that it is, that Julian is just treated like anyone else, and that he's not really a prisoner. He's just there. He's just a remand prisoner. It's different. There is no difference. Julian's treated exactly like as if he were a convicted prisoner, and plus he's treated extra stringently, because so what happened was that the Reporters Without Borders, which has been one of the NGOs, I think one of the most vocal NGOs on Julian's case, two of their representatives, the Secretary General, so the top guy, and the head of their global campaigns, Rebecca Vincent, they both wanted to visit Julian, and it's quite a process to get someone to visit Julian. First of all, Julian has to be the one to put the visitors on his list, so it has to be he that requests it, and then that takes a few weeks or months for the prison to process. And once that is done, then you have to wait on a date that works for everyone, and then you put them on the list. The prison has vetted the people who visit him, and then they come on the day that has been booked. So they came on the day, and they showed up, and both of them had traveled from Paris, and they get to this first stage where you sign in and they take your fingerprints, and they said, oh, well, actually, you're not on the visit anymore. You've been removed from the visit and removed from the list. This was without any prior notice. And the prison received intelligence that you were journalists. Reporters Without Borders tried to contact the governor of the prison, which is like the warden, the person who runs the prison. They asked them to speak to them directly. They said that they weren't there as journalists. They were not there to interview Julian, that they were RSF, and that whatever rules the prison imposed, they would respect, and then they were just there to meet with Julian. Nothing could be done, but this is the way that the British authorities deal with Julian. They're terrified of Julian being seen, of his case being talked about, of there being witnesses to what's going on, and it's clear what happened. That they realized that these were high-profile people who could or who would speak about what they had seen, having spoken to Julian, and they wanted to prevent it at all costs. And it's when we got married last year. The two witnesses we wanted, friends of Julian's, happened to be journalists. They were turned down. Our our wedding witnesses were rejected on the basis that they were journalists. We also tried to get a photographer in who was a professional photographer. One of the reasons that they rejected him was that he was a freelancer who also worked for Reuters. And finally, after a big fight, the prison said they would allow pictures, that they would take the pictures themselves, so they have the files. They did send us a printout of the pictures, which was a printout on regular A4 paper, not the photo style. So it's not good quality. And they said you're not allowed to share this on social media or with the press. So that's the conditions on which we were given these pictures, and obviously they hold the original files, so they're holding our wedding pictures hostage in a sense. We did ask our lawyers to ask the prison to secure, to not destroy those pictures, the files. Who knows what will happen there, but we're currently under a prohibition to share our wedding pictures. It's completely absurd because they took the pictures. It's against a white wall. There's absolutely no security reason why, which was the excuse why those pictures are a threat. They're a threat to the reputation of the British state. That's the reality.
I mean, it sounds absurd, as you said, or ridiculous, but I imagine it's extremely annoying if you are subjected to such idiotic little. I may add that when representatives of Reporter ohne Grenzen wanted to attend one of the trials about the extradition of Julian, they were rejected because there were no journalists. So this shows to me that it's just about harassing and about. It's not really serious. It's not really logical. I would like to know, was Julian able to attend these? There were at least 4 or 5 public meetings of courts. The District Court of Westminster and then the High Court and so on. Was Julian allowed to attend these public sessions of the courts?
Not since the 6th of January 2021. So what we've seen is a progressive erasure of Julian's image in the public domain. When you see pictures of Julian in the prison van, it's literally from 2019 when he had just been arrested and taken to court within the first month or so. And those pictures were everywhere in the press, and then from then on, the prison vans were changed, and he was put in a Category A prison van, which is what he describes like it's like a vertical coffin, basically. Yeah. So everyone's sectioned off, and then when you get close to the courthouse, the windows get a steel shutter. So that's why you don't have any more pictures of Julian coming into court between 29 and 2021, because you just can't do those pictures through the windows anymore. And then after the 6th of January 2021, which is when Julian had won the first round of the extradition case that later was reversed, immediately he tried to get bail, and he was taken to court for this bail hearing. But the bail hearing, the bail was rejected, and that was the last time he was allowed to attend court. And after that, there have been other hearings. There was a high court hearing in October 2021. And in 2022 as well, in June 2022. And on both occasions, he requested via his lawyers to be able to attend in person, and the courts rejected it. And they said, no, you can attend remotely via video link. So that's been the excuse. He can't even attend his own hearings. and he attends from Belmarsh, from a room in Belmarsh with this low-quality video link, where he obviously cannot consult with his lawyers, and he's just basically a spectator on something that's happening 10 miles away inside a London courtroom, as if it had nothing to do with him.
I mean, you should add that this kind of treatment somehow is a contrast of what German politicians used to say, like Annalena Baerbock, our foreign minister. She said, and also other spokespeople for the government said, we trust in the rule of law in Britain. Yeah, so Britain is the cradle of democracy, and they have all these lovely judges with wigs, and so this is the official point of view. But let me go back to the United States. I mentioned this this indictment, 17 points, 175 years, the maximum sentence, and also the American the prosecutors use a law from 1917, the espionage law, which was made in connection with this First World War, and which is not meant for publishers, for journalists, and for these kind of people, but for spies in war times. All right. What do you think, Stella? Why do the Americans hate Julian so much? Why are they after him with all? Though it might be also quite difficult to explain why they persecute Julian and why they attack other countries for violation of freedom of press. Why are they doing that? What is your thesis about it?
Well, because partly because they've been allowed to. I think that the forces that have pushed for Julian's imprisonment and silencing, they're always present. They're somewhere, hidden in the. They're present within the state, and those kinds of forces, if given an outlet and not enough pushback, they will do what they can get away with. Why Julian? Well, Julian has been at the forefront of a revolution in journalism, in which for the first time wars were transparent. The wars of Iraq and Afghanistan were contrary to what they had been, which was covered up and not really understood or reported on properly, because it was all sanitized through Pentagon press releases and embedded journalists and so on. And then all of a sudden, war had never been so clearly dissected, because it was the analysis or the data of the U.S. military, the U.S. military's own data of the dead, the maimed, the explosions, the incidents, and the fact that the U.S. had actually been counting the dead, whereas they had lied and said that they had no idea. So, the U.S. military lost control over the narrative over the Iraq and Afghan wars. The diplomatic cables were embarrassing to the United States, but they also were of extraordinary and are still of extraordinary significance, and the U.S. government's it's an attempt by the U.S. government to regain control over the narrative and intimidate journalists and say, well, you can't get away with just doing things on your own terms. And so it's a signal.
You think it's a kind of deterrence to show other journalists, look what can happen, what
Absolutely.
could happen to you.
And that's the purpose, is to have a chilling effect, which it is having a chilling effect. And that's why you get the Washington Post and the New York Times saying the case is an attack on press freedom and interfering with their ability to work, because what happens is that when there's Jack Teixeira, and the information's already out there, you see the Washington Post and the New York Times being very shy about reporting things that are circulating all over social media. And that's because their legal departments say, oh, hold on, there's this Assange case. They can go after you. They can go after us. They can threaten prison. They can bury us in expensive legal processes and so on. So the effect, of course, is for the press to not report as boldly or as bravely or as frankly as they would have if this had never been done.
I mean, you have been talking about Reporter ohne Grenzen, Reporters Without Borders, that they wanted to visit him. How is the support by NGOs or politicians? How has this been developing in the last years? Because I remember that in the beginning, Julian was depicted in the media as a dubious, narcissistic character, and so that was this kind of character assassination, as you call it in English. But how is it now? Is it more support, or it just remains the same?
Well, there's been a complete turnaround on that. I don't think there's any NGO of any profile that hasn't pronounced itself on this case. I mean, all the relevant, or all the NGOs that I'm aware of are against this case, and Reporters Without Borders, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and so on. They've actually taken the time to look at the case and to understand it and understand what a dangerous attack it is on basic democratic principles. The press has been a bit slower, but back in November last year, there was a joint statement by the 5 original newspaper partners saying that the case should be dropped and so on. It was late, of course. It should have happened as soon as Julian was arrested, because the case was clear already then that it was an attack on press freedom. But so I think in terms of the subject experts on press freedom, on human rights, and so on, there's a complete consensus about this case being an attack and Julian being a victim. Has the public is the public knowledge in consonance with that? Not enough because I think partly because a lot of people participated in this smearing and character assassination of Julian, and they were and they're slow to do the right thing, which is use the same loudspeakers they had to attack his character to now defend him, and that's what there should be a lot more of. I think of a public reckoning. That people got carried away in participating in a persecution. That's wishful thinking, especially within the press. There's not a lot of self-criticism, and it's also a very, competitive environment. and a lot of egos. So I don't have huge expectations that will come to pass. But I do think there is some of the reticence why people refuse to talk about it enough. It comes from the fact that it's hard for them to come around to acknowledging that Julian's a victim, and he so clearly is, and that's the way history is. The record has been set straight through books that have been written by Niels Meltzer, by Stefania Marizzi, and documentaries that are being made that kind of dissect the persecution against Julian and how he's been treated unfairly by different sectors of society, and I think there was a serious failure, dereliction of duty on the part of the press, that while this was occurring, there was not a critical and objective consideration of what was going on until it was too late.
I mean, if we talk at political support, what made me slightly optimistic, but very slightly, is that yesterday Stella met 8 members of the Deutschen Bundestag, 8 MPs from 4 different parties, which means the 3 governing parties plus Die Linke. And today, Claudia Roth, the State Minister for Culture, will come to this building over there and meet Stella, which is, and she will bring her deputy, and that is something to start with. That does not mean that there is substantial support by the German government, but at least, Annalena Baerbock tried to avoid any comment about Julian for months, and tried to avoid. I tried to arrange a meeting with Mrs. Baerbock and Stella, and there was no answer again from the Foreign Office. That's how they handle these cases, and it's still that if you mention the name Assange with some politician, that's very difficult, and so they don't want to comment. I think that in this country, foreign politics in mostly means following the Americans, whatever they do. And so it is very difficult for a German politician to come up with a critical point against our liberators, our former liberators, and about our Schutzmacht, or how they call them. So I think it is difficult, but some things are moving. Are there in other countries, are there political supporters? Is there happening something?
Well, unlike maybe in Germany, Julian's case is a reference point in relation to for Brazil, for Mexico. You have the Brazilian president Lula da Silva and the Mexican president López Obrador, and Argentina and Peru, and not Peru, sorry, Chile, Colombia. These are countries that talk about Julian's case publicly often, because it is a reference point of someone who fights and embodies healthy democracy, who is a political prisoner by the West, and in which the West, which is very has a lot of performance around values such as press freedom, when it comes down to it, is silent on someone who has been in prison now for 4 years for publishing true information about war crimes. And that's the way the world sees it. And that is a very clear interpretation, because that is what's happening. And so, the fact Julian's case is a reference point for countries that are not necessarily in close alliance with the United States is perhaps to be expected. And of course, it's also seized upon by enemy states, because it is a very easy way of showing Western hypocrisy, and an effective tool to beat on the West with, because it's totally fair criticism. But really, what should be happening is that the U.S. should be hearing criticism from their allies, concern over Julian's human rights, concern about how it makes Germany able to further its agenda on press freedom or on political prisoners around the world. There are ways to do this. You don't have to take an anti-American stance. It's just sophisticated diplomacy. You can still fight for the right things without, I don't think Julian's case is complicated at all. It's not a difficult case at all. Julian is not, he's not a leaker. He's a publisher. He's being pursued as a publisher. He's not an American. He was in the European Union at the time. He's within the European Council of Europe space. There are certain expectations on press freedom here. There are certain rules that should apply within this space, which are the European rules, not the US espionage laws that are applied extraterritorially on foreigners who are doing things legally here. There's a self-interest for Germany, for German politicians, to not allow this and to not tolerate what's happening in Julian's case. And of course, WikiLeaks was publishing with Der Spiegel, and just because it's only Julian so far, it doesn't mean it can't be anyone else in the future. And the United States is exporting a model of press repression, which the world is adopting, and will take notice and say, well, if they did it to Assange, why can't we do that to whoever we want to do it to? So that's the reality, that we have a new race to the bottom, where what's being done to Julian signals what you can now do to anyone.
Thanks, Stella. Before we open the floor, and you might ask questions if you want to, a last question from my side. You are fighting for Julian, for his release, for his life. What can people who think this extreme case of injustice, what can they do? Regular people like sitting here in the audience at the Taz Lab, is there anything they can do, or can they just be optimistic that one day this will be finished?
Well, popular mobilization is essential. It's been essential. It's been instrumental in Australia, where the Prime Minister now has said that he thinks that Julian should be free. The only reason why the Australian Prime Minister came out and said that and campaigned for it is because his voters expected him to and kind of demanded it, because politicians can have opinions about things, but they won't actually pronounce it if they think that it won't advance their political career. So the public is the one that has to give the signals of what their expectations is of the politicians and the stances that they should take, and that their silence is intolerable. In terms of organizing, there's a freeassange.eu is a website that stays up to date with in Germany and what's happening in Europe. There's also don'textraditeassange.com that has a newsletter that we send out about once a week with the latest on the cases and interviews and so on. People can donate to the Valholland Foundation, which collects donations for Julian. You have to select Julian Assange as the recipient, and that's tax deductible. And above all, to stay on top of what's going on, because there are constantly a lot of mobilizations, events, conferences, films, etc., that are being shown, and to keep this case alive, and you know, above all, to talk to your friends, colleagues, family, inform them by the books by Niels Meltzer and Stefania Marizzi, and just make this case. This is a political case. It needs to be a live issue. It's not something that anyone should feel resigned to. That this is, you know, that Julian's fate is sealed. It's not sealed at all. This case is extremely controversial. In the United States, within the Biden administration. It's a problem for the US, it's a problem for the UK, it's a problem for the West, and it keeps on coming up. So, you know, it's Julian's freedom depends on sufficient popular outrage to tip the balance, and on the day it tips the balance is the day that Julian's free.
Thanks, Stella. When you mentioned the Valholland Foundation, I forgot to say in the beginning, we had the plan to have Andy Müller-Maguhn on this empty chair there. He's with the Chaos Computer Club and with the Valholland Foundation, and the Valholland Foundation is very important organizing the money, which the defense of Julian is a very costly thing with a lot of lawyers and things to do. But Andy came in from Southeast Asia yesterday, and now he's collapsed with a jet lag, and I have to excuse him here. He says everybody's sorry that he is not here. Now, if you have any questions to Stella, you have got the chance to ask them right now. If you want to ask them in German, that's fine. I would translate it, so you don't have to speak English. There's a guy with a microphone coming.
Okay. One question that always comes back after I read whatever the newsletter says, or the participation of normal people, is there anybody specific who is taking a revenge on Julian, or on because I think at this time it should have kind of floated away a little bit. It's been in the public light for so long. And what he really did, I mean, wasn't that big. He did what, in my opinion, was right. And the reaction is so harsh and so bitter, and we get you, that I don't understand. I think there's no real relation between that. Thank you.
Well, there's certainly some sectors that are pushing for Julian to remain imprisoned and silenced. And really, when things got very sinister was after WikiLeaks published the CIA Vault 7 publication, which was the biggest CIA leak in history. And Mike Pompeo was the head of the CIA at the time, and made an unprecedented, aggressive speech. I mean, it was his first speech as CIA director, in which he didn't talk about, China or ISIS or that kind of thing. He talked about WikiLeaks and vowed to bring down WikiLeaks. And attacked Julian personally and referenced an article that Julian had just published in the Washington Post. The man was obsessed, and since then we've learned quite a lot about how he was obsessed to a degree that even within the CIA and the National Security Council, they considered that elements within that who, are engaged in some pretty dark things themselves, considered that what his reaction to WikiLeaks and Julian was unhinged and beyond the pale. So I think that's basically Julian's imprisonment and what has happened, the planting of the stories in the media and so on. All you can see a clear trajectory there, and Yahoo News also reported having spoken to over 30 sources within the National Security Council and the CIA during this Trump era, during the Pompeo era, saying that they had discussed assassinating Julian in the White House, that they had plans to kidnap him, which were very advanced, and so on. And ultimately, they did kidnap him, right? They did it with the complicity of the Ecuadorian government. They withdrew him from his internationally recognized and established protection in a completely irregular manner. They forced him into a police van. They took him to the highest security prison in London, where he remained. So that it's not like there was a CIA plan to kidnap and silence Julian, and it didn't work. No, it worked. It worked, and what we saw, there was a range of actions that they wanted to take, but ultimately silencing and imprisoning him was one of the strands, and that's the one that they went with, and the others kind of remained incomplete or discarded for now, I should say, because I mean, what are we even talking about? Extraditing a person to the country that planned his assassination. That should be sufficient for any country, any European country, to say actually this is too much has happened here, and clearly he should be free. There's no way he can face a fair trial under these circumstances after there's evidence in court cases in Spain, material seized showing that his legal meetings were being recorded and transported to the United States. And I mean, we know too much about the criminality that the U.S. is engaged in to continue with this farce that this is just an extradition case and business as usual. It's not business as usual. This is a criminal enterprise to harass and persecute a publisher, a journalist, for doing his job, and he is a political prisoner in the heart of the Western Hemisphere. And okay, so there are these forces, the Mike Pompeo era CIA, and some elements within the national security establishment who are perfectly okay with this, and who desire these signals to be sent. I mean, that they're perfectly happy with intimidating the press, stopping leaks, making sure journalists are afraid to receive leaks, and certainly won't publish them, and so on. This is precisely what they want. But there are other parts of society that have to counteract this, and that's a reality. You don't have, the United States is not some monolithic entity. Even within the Biden administration, there's a lot of discontent about this case within the Democratic party. There is opposition to this case. There was a letter just a couple of weeks ago from members of the Democratic Progressive Caucus, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Rashida Tlaib and so on. 7 members, but prominent members, saying that this case should be dropped. So it's wrong to think nothing can be done. It takes a groundswell of opposition, of opinion from the bottom up, for the decision makers to do the right thing, you know, and it really is the case that Mike Pompeo was unhinged, was a rogue element, should not have gone after Julian and WikiLeaks the way the CIA did, and that there are forces that are pulling in the other direction, and they need to be supported and amplified.
Thanks, Stella. As far as I got it, we don't have time for any other question, but I would say you have questions. We can just talk outside for a few minutes. And Stella, I thank you very much. Stella's a very brave woman, I think. And I thank you for... Yes, I thank you for giving us all this information about Julian and his case. And somehow I am optimistic, because it's so absurd what's happened to him. It can't, there must be an end in the foreseeable future. But that is just a feeling, not, yeah, we all hope. Yeah. Thank you very much for coming.